February 19, 1945, Iwo Jima. Japanese forces broadcast racist insults toward black Marines moving toward the beach. They are classified as labor units, yet they land in the same firestorm as assault troops. Ammunition lines collapse, officers fall, and the men labeled non-combat become the only link between survival and defeat. The enemy mocks them. Their own command doubts them. Both are about to be proven wrong. What follows will expose a truth buried for decades, one that reshapes who we think fought this battle and why their role was hidden. Stories like this deserve to be preserved, and Battlefront Insider brings them forward. U.S. military doctrine in 1945 organizes forces according to racial hierarchy, assigning combat authority to white units and relegating black Marines to labor roles. These policies define who is expected to fight and who is expected to support, establishing strict categories that shape every stage of planning for the Pacific Campaign. Depot and ammunition companies, composed largely of black Marines, are structured to operate behind the lines and are not evaluated for direct engagement. As the invasion of Iwo Jima is prepared, two such units, the 8th Marine Depot Company and the 36th Marine Depot Company, are included in the landing force. Their mission is formally limited to unloading supplies, transporting ammunition, and maintaining logistic continuity for assault troops. These functions are viewed as essential but not heroic, placing the men in a position where their contributions are necessary yet invisible within the official hierarchy. Iwo Jima's strategic importance elevates the stakes of the operation. The island's location is central to the American bombing campaign against mainland Japan, and planners identify it as critical for establishing an airfield to support crippled aircraft returning from long-range missions. Securing this ground becomes a non-negotiable objective for the Pacific strategy. Japanese military leadership anticipates this priority and prepares accordingly. Intelligence reports indicate more than 21,000 defenders entrenched in layered tunnels, fortified positions, and interlocking fields of fire. These defenses are designed to maximize American losses and delay any advance long enough to disrupt broader U.S. operations in the region. Despite these warnings, Marine Corps planners project a relatively short engagement and underestimate the scale of resistance. For the black Marines assigned to depot units, the situation represents a dual reality. They are recognized as essential for sustaining the invasion but denied recognition as combat-capable personnel. This contradiction shapes their expectations as they prepare for deployment. They know their roles and official records but also understand that battlefield conditions often ignore such distinctions. Racial tensions within the U.S. military add another layer of complexity. Segregated facilities, unequal treatment, and assumptions about capability create internal barriers that exist before any confrontation with the enemy. These men enter the operation navigating both an external mission and an internal system that limits their standing. As the invasion force moves toward its target, the contradiction solidifies. Men trained for combat, assigned to labor, are positioned for an operation expected to become the most difficult assault in the Pacific. The outcome of this clash between policy and necessity remains unresolved. The landing begins under conditions that immediately strain every assumption built into the operation. Black Marines enter the beach as part of the first wave assigned to ammunition resupply, yet their designated tasks are impossible to carry out as planned. The terrain disrupts movement, halts vehicles, and prevents the establishment of reliable distribution lines. Supplies intended for steady transport remain immobile, leaving frontline units without the resources they were promised. Japanese fire disrupts the formation of command structures and produces rapid casualties among officers responsible for coordinating logistics. Communication gaps widen as equipment is lost and key personnel are removed from action. Remaining leaders attempt to issue orders despite fragmented information, creating conflicting instructions that undermine efficiency. The depot companies, fixed to their supply zones by regulation, face increasing pressure to break from their defined role. Forward infantry units exhaust their ammunition reserves far sooner than anticipated. Requests for resupply accumulate faster than they can be addressed. With limited options, officers direct depot Marines to move forward despite the risk associated with exposing unprotected labor units to active combat zones. These instructions contradict official policy but reflect the collapsing reality of the beachhead. As the depot Marines advance, they confront tasks that exceed their formal training only in designation, not in capability. They carry crates manually across exposed areas while under continuous threat. The number of able-bodied transport personnel decreases as casualties rise, forcing survivors to adapt roles in real time. The movement of ammunition becomes sporadic, unpredictable, and dependent on individuals acting without coordinated support. The segregation policy becomes an operational liability. The limited number of authorized combat troops cannot sustain the line without reinforcement, yet reinforcement is restricted by doctrine. Depot Marines fill the gaps despite the absence of recognition for doing so. Each movement forward acknowledges a contradiction the institution refuses to address. The men performing essential combat functions are officially excluded from combat identity. No journalist or photographer documents this shift, leaving an unrecorded transformation in the structure of the battle. Reports written during these early hours reflect the official understanding rather than the actual distribution of tasks. Depot companies are recorded as functioning within their designated scope even as they execute responsibilities far beyond it. Japanese forces do not distinguish between supply and assault personnel. Every Marine within reach becomes a target, dissolving the institutional differentiation imposed by American doctrine. The beach becomes an environment where policy loses all operational significance and survival depends on actions rather than assignments. The problem emerges with complete clarity. The operation cannot succeed without the labor of men the institution refuses to acknowledge as combatants. Their contribution is essential yet structurally unrecognized, setting the stage for decisions that will challenge the military's own regulations. The contradiction deepens as losses mount, and the gap between official policy and battlefield necessity becomes impossible to ignore. The beach does not allow the institution's rules to stand, and the consequences of this collapse will shape the remainder of the campaign. By the end of the first day, Black Marines are no longer participating in a defined support role. Their responsibilities expand without formal authorization as casualties increase. Every attempt to maintain separation between combat and logistics breaks down under the demands of the battle. Men assigned to handle supplies perform tasks indistinguishable from those of assault units, and the cost of this shift becomes immediate. The 8th Depot Company experiences losses while transporting ammunition through areas under direct threat. These casualties are categorized according to their unit designation rather than the conditions in which they fell. The official record maintains a separation between combat and support that no longer exists in practice. The gap between action and documentation widens with each death. Families receive notifications describing their sons as having fallen in support positions. These statements omit the circumstances surrounding their deaths, preventing relatives from understanding the nature of their service. Letters from fellow Marines attempt to provide clarity, but these accounts conflict with official statements, creating confusion for those waiting at home. Japanese broadcasts exploit these contradictions. Messages target Black Marines directly, attempting to create division by emphasizing inequities within the American system. These broadcasts reference known policies and attempt to use them to undermine morale. The attempt fails, yet the existence of the propaganda confirms that the internal contradictions of the American system are visible to the enemy. White officers begin assigning Black Marines to defensive positions as casualties force them to redistribute personnel. These assignments occur without written orders and without long-term acknowledgement. Some Depot Marines take over weapon positions vacated by casualties. Others reinforce defensive lines where manpower shortages threaten structural collapse. These actions arise from necessity rather than recognition. Medical evacuation procedures treat all wounded identically, yet the recording of their service continues to reflect outdated categories. Marines injured while performing combat responsibilities are listed as support casualties. The official record reflects a narrative that does not match the conditions on the ground. On the beaches, the processing of the dead follows administrative rules rather than battlefield realities. Bodies are sorted by unit affiliation, ensuring that their role is interpreted according to designation rather than actual task. This process ensures that the combat contribution of depot companies is omitted from historical documentation. As the battle continues into the third day, Japanese forces recognize that all American units are participating directly. They adjust their targeting to focus on ammunition dumps, understanding that these locations sustain the entire invasion. Black Marines defending these positions engage in prolonged combat without the expectation of acknowledgement. Their work is necessary to prevent collapse, yet it remains unrecognized within official structures. The human cost expands in two directions. The first is the physical loss incurred by performing tasks that exceed formal designation. The second is the erasure of these actions from institutional memory. Both outcomes reinforce the inequality embedded in the structure of the military at this moment. The burden of this contradiction is carried by those performing the tasks rather than those creating the policy. Marines in depot units face increasing pressure to continue a role that will not be formally recorded. Their survival depends on actions not recognized by the institution responsible for documenting their service. As the losses accumulate, the question becomes how many sacrifices will pass without acknowledgement. The men on the ground understand the stakes, even if the official record does not. The battle is being sustained by a contribution that the institution refuses to name. Stories shaped by these buried sacrifices deserve to be preserved, and Battlefront Insider continues that work. By the end of this stage of the operation, the institutional response remains unchanged despite the expanding list of casualties. Men continue to fall in a war they are officially not fighting. The contradiction deepens and prepares the ground for decisions that will drive the next phase of the campaign. As the first week concludes, the duration of the battle surpasses all projections. The tempo of operations requires every available Marine to participate in tasks that extend beyond their assigned roles. Depot companies, once intended to function behind the lines, now operate alongside infantry units in both defensive and offensive positions. This shift occurs without debate, yet it forces every participant to confront a moral conflict between institutional loyalty and immediate survival. The expectations placed on Black Marines evolve rapidly as necessity intensifies. They face repeated circumstances in which refusal to act outside their designated function would jeopardize the integrity of the broader force. Yet acting beyond those boundaries reinforces a system that benefits from their participation without granting corresponding recognition. Each decision to continue reflects a tension between personal dignity and collective duty. Officers begin identifying specific Black Marines for particular operations based on demonstrated effectiveness. These selections occur informally and without record. They reflect the recognition of capability on an individual level while maintaining its denial at the institutional level. Such requests place additional pressure on those selected, who understand that success in these tasks will not alter their official standing. Some depot Marines are assigned to clear enemy positions using equipment normally reserved for assault units. These assignments demonstrate operational trust while reinforcing administrative exclusion. No mechanism exists to update their status, meaning their contributions will be recorded inaccurately. This gap between action and recognition grows with every undocumented operation. The institution's failure becomes increasingly apparent as the battle's demands escalate. The military relies on the performance of those it simultaneously restricts. White Marines working alongside depot units observe the contradiction firsthand. Some express private support for the inclusion of Black Marines in combat roles, but such views do not influence policy during the operation. The institutional structure remains rigid despite evidence that undermines its validity. Japanese forces attempt to exploit this tension by continuing targeted broadcasts. These attempts rely on the assumption that internal divisions can reduce American cohesion. The broadcasts produce no measurable effect, reflecting the resolve of those whose loyalty is questioned by their own system but never wavers in practice. For the depot Marines, the moral crossroad is not defined by a single moment but by repeated decisions made under pressure. Each task performed outside their designation reinforces a pattern in which personal action compensates for institutional inaction. Their continued participation acknowledges an unspoken truth. The battle cannot be won without their contribution, yet that contribution will remain unrecognized. Chaplains and non-commissioned officers interact with these Marines, attempting to provide perspective on the tension between service and recognition. These exchanges are informal and undocumented, reflecting the institution's reluctance to engage with the contradiction directly. For some Marines, belief in eventual acknowledgement provides motivation. Others accept that recognition may never come. Responsibility for this situation shifts gradually from individuals to the system itself. The Marines fulfill their obligations repeatedly, while the institution fails to reconcile its policies with the reality of the battlefield. The moral conflict becomes a measure of endurance rather than a debate over policy. The crossroad becomes the defining feature of their service. They continue not because the institution validates their role but because failure to continue would compromise the mission and the safety of those around them. The consequences of their decisions extend beyond the island and shape the trajectory of future policy debates. The choice has already been made through consistent action rather than formal declaration. The battle continues with a structure held together by the efforts of men whose status the institution refuses to adjust. The long-term implications of these actions will reach far beyond the immediate conflict, affecting both historical memory and military policy for years to come. The moral conflict is sustained, unresolved, and foundational to understanding the deeper significance of what happens next. As the battle progresses, Marine Corps officers adopt an administrative approach that quietly diverges from official policy. After-action reports begin omitting unit designations for certain tasks performed near the front. These omissions prevent accurate identification of depot companies performing combat roles and allow the institution to maintain its formal structure without confronting the contradictions revealed by the battle. Black Marines are rotated into assault positions through informal channels. These rotations reflect tactical necessity rather than administrative approval. Personnel records do not document the changes, ensuring that the official account of each Marine service remains aligned with policy rather than practice. Senior officers are aware of these adaptations and choose not to intervene. No written orders authorize the rotations and none forbid them. This silence enables a dual reality. The policy remains intact in principle while being disregarded in execution. The institution avoids responsibility for the contradiction by refusing to acknowledge it directly. Combat effectiveness becomes the measure that guides these decisions. The operational requirement to maintain momentum outweighs adherence to segregation rules. Black Marines perform tasks identical to those of designated assault units, yet the institution continues to categorize them according to their original assignments. The Depot Marines recognize the shift but do not challenge the lack of formal acknowledgement. Their priority is completing the mission and ensuring the survival of their units. Bureaucratic correction is deferred indefinitely, replaced by a focus on operational success. White Marines participating in mixed positions do not report the divergence between policy and reality. Their silence supports the maintenance of an unofficial system that prioritizes function over regulation. The battlefield becomes a space where administrative categories hold no practical authority. Japanese intelligence observes American movements but does not detect the internal policy violation. The adaptation has no direct impact on enemy planning, and the lack of external scrutiny allows the practice to continue without risk of formal exposure. This unofficial arrangement operates as a pragmatic response to conditions that exceed the capacity of the original structure. It is not a conspiracy but an adjustment made necessary by circumstances. The institution benefits from the flexibility while avoiding the consequences of acknowledging it. The secret act becomes embedded in the internal history of the battle. Its details remain absent from official documentation, ensuring that the discrepancy between policy and practice will persist long after the fighting ends. The contradiction now operates at an institutional level, shaping the conflict's outcome while remaining hidden from the formal record. Japanese forces initiate a coordinated counterattack aimed directly at the American ammunition depots. The 36th Depot Company occupies the position first hit by the assault, placing them in the path of an operation designed to break the supply structure of the invasion. Reinforcements are committed elsewhere, leaving the Depot Marines responsible for holding the position without immediate assistance. The attack develops into a prolonged engagement requiring sustained defense. Black Marines operate rifles, machine guns, and grenades to maintain control of the area. Each decision to continue reflects the reality that no other unit can reach the position in time. The depot remains intact, preventing critical shortages in the forward lines. Casualties occur among depot personnel, but the defenders prevent the attackers from breaching the perimeter. Their actions ensure that ammunition continues moving toward frontline units without interruption. White officers later submit written reports attributing the defense to unnamed Marine elements, omitting the Depot Company designation to maintain official consistency with existing policy. The engagement provides definitive evidence that Depot Marines can perform combat duties with effectiveness equal to designated assault units. This proof does not influence immediate policy decisions, and no formal recognition follows. The institutional structure remains unchanged despite the demonstrated capability. The test becomes a turning point in the internal understanding of the Depot Company's role. The men involved understand that the evaluation of their actions will occur slowly, if at all, within the official record. The absence of acknowledgement does not alter the outcome of the battle, but it shapes the narrative that will follow. This moment stands as a reminder that stories shaped by unrecorded courage require continued attention from those committed to revealing the full account. The capability is established, but the institution withholds recognition, creating a gap that will persist long after the fighting ends. Following the events on Iwo Jima, other Pacific operations begin adjusting their practices without initiating policy changes. Officers responsible for coordinating manpower adopt informal methods based on lessons drawn from the Depot Company's performance. These adaptations distribute Black Marines into more forward roles during subsequent engagements, despite the lack of administrative updates. The expansion of duties occurs through personal communication between commanders rather than through directives. Each new assignment reinforces the idea that capability can be acknowledged informally even while excluded from the institutional framework. Unit designations remain unchanged, preserving the official record despite the shifting reality. White Marines returning from Iwo Jima carry altered perspectives that challenge pre-existing assumptions. Some openly question the validity of segregation policies during private discussions. Others maintain silence, acknowledging the contradiction without addressing it directly. The transformation spreads inconsistently, shaped by the attitudes of individual leaders rather than coordinated reform. Japanese intelligence reports do not reflect these internal adjustments. The external perception of American unit composition remains unaltered, highlighting the internal nature of the shift. The lack of visible change preserves the appearance of continuity, even as operations evolve. Families of Black Marines begin receiving letters describing combat experiences that differ from the roles officially assigned. These accounts generate questions that cannot be answered during wartime, as the official record does not acknowledge the expanded responsibilities. This transition reveals the broader significance of what occurred on Iwo Jima, showing how actions taken without recognition can still reshape the structure of future operations. Moments like these remind audiences why ongoing examination of overlooked history remains essential to understanding how change begins. The ripple expands quietly, building the foundation for future transformation even as the institution maintains its existing framework. Japanese forces respond to the evolving situation without adjusting their defensive strategy. Their assessments focus on tactical developments rather than the racial composition of opposing units. Early propaganda broadcasts aimed at exploiting American racial divisions end when they fail to produce measurable effects. The enemy prioritizes defense of the island over social analysis of the attacking force. This absence of reaction underscores the irrelevance of segregation doctrine to battlefield outcomes. The Japanese defenders treat all American forces as uniform threats, eliminating the distinction that American policy attempts to enforce. The failure of race-based psychological warfare reinforces the limitations of the assumptions underlying it. Within the American command structure, reports from Iwo Jima generate internal debate. Senior officers reviewing accounts of depot companies' combat performance confront evidence that contradicts established doctrine. Some advocate revising existing policies to reflect demonstrated capability. Others argue that altering structure during wartime would risk disrupting established order. The result is inaction, as leadership avoids implementing changes that might acknowledge the inconsistencies revealed by combat. Media coverage of the battle centers on widely circulated images and narratives. The raising of the flag, casualty reports, and strategic outcomes dominate public understanding. Black Marines appear in scattered photographs, but their unit affiliations and responsibilities go unmentioned. The absence of contextual identification ensures that the public remains unaware of their combat involvement. Award recommendations submitted after the battle reflect this pattern. Some Black Marines receive nominations for commendations based on exceptional performance, but these recommendations undergo extended review or are downgraded. No comprehensive effort is made to evaluate the full scope of their contributions. The system acknowledges individual actions selectively rather than addressing the structural issues highlighted by the battle. The official histories compiled in the immediate post-war years maintain the narrative that depot companies operated strictly within their designated roles. This presentation contradicts battlefield reports while aligning with institutional preferences. As a result, the public record omits the operational reality experienced by those who participated directly. Interviews conducted with Japanese survivors after the war reveal no awareness of racial distinctions within American forces. Their accounts describe Marines as a single entity, reinforcing the disconnect between American policy and enemy perception. The structure maintained within the American system has no tactical relevance to those confronting it. The irony becomes increasingly apparent. The policy designed to maintain internal order does not influence enemy actions or battlefield outcomes. Instead, it creates barriers within the American force that limit recognition for those whose actions helped secure victory. The failure to adapt policy after Iwo Jima delays broader integration efforts. The consequences extend beyond the battle, affecting military structure until external pressure forces reform. The pattern established during the battle continues, shaping institutional behavior long after the island is secured. The reactions of both the enemy and the American system reveal a shared truth. The racial policy maintained by the institution serves ideology rather than strategic necessity, and the battle exposes this contradiction with clarity. The battle concludes after 36 days of sustained operations. The island is secured, and surviving Marines are reassigned according to the established structure. Black Marines from the depot companies return to their designated support roles in subsequent campaigns, resuming the duties defined by policy rather than the tasks they performed on Iwo Jima. Their personnel files reflect the assignments written before the invasion, not the responsibilities they assumed during the fighting. The official records categorize their service strictly within the boundaries of depot company functions. Reports produced after the battle align with administrative expectations rather than battlefield reality. Individual Marines receive honorable discharges in the years that follow, with some receiving minor commendations that acknowledge reliability and conduct but not the full extent of their combat involvement. These commendations mark individual recognition but do not address the structural omission embedded in the larger record. Marine Corps histories written in the immediate post-war decades present a streamlined narrative of the battle. These volumes emphasize strategic decisions, command movements, casualty statistics, and the actions of designated combat units. The depot companies receive mention as logistical elements but are not described as having participated directly in combat operations. The absence of detailed analysis ensures that the contributions of Black Marines remain hidden within the formal narrative. As the years progress, historians and researchers begin examining unit logs, operational maps, and surviving testimonies. These investigations reveal inconsistencies between official accounts and first-hand recollections. Veterans describe events in which depot Marines performed tasks absent from the institutional record. Their accounts provide specific details that challenge earlier interpretations and highlight the gap between written documentation and lived experience. The process of reconstructing the operational reality becomes a long-term historical effort. Scholars compile interviews and cross-reference documents to piece together a more accurate understanding of what happened on the island. Their work does not change the original record but adds a parallel history that acknowledges the overlooked contributions of Black Marines whose actions shaped the course of the battle. The legacy that emerges is one of gradual recognition. The institutional narrative remains largely intact, but supplemental histories correct the omissions by preserving testimonies that might otherwise be lost. This recognition arrives too late for many who served, yet it provides a more complete account for future generations. The resolution reflects an acknowledgement of truth without a full institutional correction, leaving a record that is more accurate than before but still incomplete. The events on Iwo Jima reveal how institutions struggle when doctrine conflicts with operational necessity. The segregated structure of the Marine Corps assigned Black Marines to support roles, yet the demands of the battle required them to assume responsibilities far beyond those classifications. Their actions demonstrated ability under conditions that allowed no alternative, proving capability in practice while the institution continued to deny it in policy. The challenge they faced was twofold. They carried out tasks essential to the success of the mission while knowing that their official status would not reflect their contribution. They fulfilled the expectations of combat effectiveness while being denied the recognition normally associated with such service. Their efforts resolved the immediate tactical needs of the battle but did not resolve the structural limitations placed upon them. The responsibility for this contradiction does not rest with the individuals involved. The burden lies with the institution that maintained policies inconsistent with operational evidence. Segregation created inefficiencies that impeded the full use of available personnel. The delay in integration prolonged disparities that persisted long after the battle ended. The proof required to challenge the policy existed in 1945. The outcomes demonstrated that capability depended on training, leadership, and cohesion, not race. Nevertheless, formal change did not occur until 1948, when external pressure compelled a shift in policy. The delay underscores the endurance of institutional practices even in the face of clear evidence. The reflection that emerges is not centered on individual acts of heroism but on the larger implications of institutional inertia. Systems built on inaccurate assumptions resist correction, often requiring years of accumulated evidence before change becomes unavoidable. Those who provide this evidence frequently do so without witnessing the eventual reform their actions support. The meaning remains relevant beyond the historical moment. The narrative demonstrates how institutions must confront their own structures when reality contradicts doctrine. The lesson extends into any context where policy fails to reflect the capacity and contributions of those it governs. The story of the Black Marines on Iwo Jima now occupies a place within the broader historical record. Recognition arrived slowly, shaped by later research that preserved accounts almost lost to time. The men who served carried out responsibilities that exceeded their assigned roles, contributing to the eventual integration of the U.S. military. Their efforts remain significant even if official acknowledgement lagged behind their actions. Their legacy continues through the work of those committed to documenting overlooked histories, ensuring these accounts endure. For those who value these truths, your presence helps keep them alive. This is Battlefront Insider, where we reveal the human stories behind every war.